Expect. So, Hila, if let's say Sasha Mutai calls you, and tells you, like, based on your experience and based on what you know, how do we move forward from here? We know, like there's those issues with financing, there's issues with sponsors, there's issues with trust, even from the players based on what you had said. So how do we move forward to a point where, like Kenya will become competitive once again, both, like in the 15s, because now I see we have to start from the 15s and then trickling up to the 7s. What do you tell Sasha?
Sasha has a very, very clear-cut job cut ahead for him. And I know he's also very passionate about the 15s and age grade setup. Within the last 3 months, I have seen him actively on the forefront attending Prescott Cup matches. If you actually look at the pictures, you'll see him there. Blackrock was being played across the last weekend. I saw him giving the trophies there.
Mm-hmm. And I also saw there was a women's tournament for Blackrock this time. Yeah.
The Nairobi Metropolitan qualifiers for nationals 6 weeks ago. So he's trying to actually understand from a National Secondary School Sports Association what sort of linkages need to be done. And he's actually looked not only at the playing ability but also in the officiating. The one thing that he needs to then be able to understand is how to have that transition being retained now. If you look at the numbers of rugby players in Kenya, and I go back to age grade development, which I said we lost for about 8-9 years. If you look at the sort of statistics that we have on World Rugby, talking towards the number of rugby players in this country and whatnot, if you look at primary school, and this way it becomes pear-shaped, we probably have, but not formally on, we probably have maybe, say, I think if you look at the last set of data, close to about 16 to 17,000 children at primary school, mostly around Nairobi and the metropolitan towns of Nakuru and Mombasa, who play rugby.
Yeah, that's true.
When you get into high school, that 17,000 breaks down and it comes like about 11,000.
Okay. What happens to these other kids who are playing rugby?
So we don't know what actually happens. They just vanish. No one actually tracks.
Okay.
Then from high school into colleges, even gets lower, about 2,000 to 3,000. So our retention is a big issue. One, because no one actually goes on through to actually create an understanding as to whether it's an issue of the disparity in geographical location, where we need to perhaps go around and get a couple of clubs placed up, and it could be a mixture of issues. Do we need to speak to the ministry, to speak to the county associations, to ensure that you can actually go around and ensure that maybe we're actually losing out on players in Meru because there's only one team in Meru, or there's, I don't know, a couple of players in Baringo. What are we doing to go around and actually understand what's fundamentally not working? So we do a lot of work at the very onset, but you end up losing close to 70% of the players when you really need them.
Okay, that critical stage. And at that stage, a player is still, their trajectory is still going up.
Correct.
So there are players who are improving.
And you remember when he had Lawrence Olum, he talked about retention.
Yes.
Like at some point, like kids who probably may have potential of doing something better, either joining a national team or whatever, but at some point it's like kids just disappear.
They disappear.
Especially like when they get into high school, because we had Lawrence talking about soccer, and at some point it's like kids chomoka primo, they ingia high school, but over there in high school there's nobody searching, there's nobody looking, there's nobody paying attention, and they just disappear.
Yeah.
So the first thing, if I was Sasha, I'd look at is just the developmental pathway, retention as a key thing. The second bit, which is a very tough discussion, especially now post-COVID, with the economy in Kenya being as is being able to understand what sort of commercial partnership you can actually get for rugby, but do not place it as a commercial partnership for rugby in Kenya, but look at it as a commercial partnership for rugby in Africa. And rope in people like Uganda into the conversation. Rope in people like Zimbabwe into the conversation, Namibia, because by and large, also having, some ripple effects because of, the post-pandemic sort of scenario that we're having. South Africa is not doing any better. If you look at the records that South Africa Rugby have, they've also been hurt. And if you look at just globally, I saw an article, very sad article 2 days ago. London Irish have also been wound up. London Wasps were wound up this particular season.
Wow.
So not so much money is being actually pumped into rugby even on a global front. If you're seeing 2 premiership clubs in the UK getting into administration, it tells you about what's happening. So that is the toughest bit. Looking at the structural bit on development is an easier fix. Looking at retention is an easier fix. The commercial discussion has to be mooted in a way such that any commercial party you're looking at trying to get, you've got to rope in a couple of people, create the level of value to try and plug in. Unfortunately, that's where we are, at least for the next year or two.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where do you see us? Where do you see us going? Because I know, like from the outside, we're just looking from a perspective that our sevens team was relegated. Can they come back within a season? Because like coming back from relegation is not an easy feat. Or should we be looking at this in a longer term? It may not happen for the next 3 years or for the next 4 years. Should we prepare ourselves for that?
So I like being an optimist, and we probably have maybe another 11 months before the qualifiers to see whether we'll actually get promoted or not. We'll be on, and I believe we'll go around. Sevens is easy to go around and get back into it. The bigger problem is trying to create the structure for 15s that is sustainable.
Okay.
So next month, the Junior World Rugby Trophy will be played in Nairobi from the 15th to the 30th of July.
Okay.
So Scotland, who got relegated from the Junior Under 20 World Cup, will be coming into Nairobi. We'll have Samoa coming in. I think the US will also be taking part. Uruguay.
This is 15s rugby.
15s under 20.
Wow, that will be amazing.
Yes. So now, if you were to ask me, because we're actually hosting the Junior World Rugby Trophy in Nairobi, if you had to ask me, Hillary, what would your mind, what would your emotion want? If you could potentially go around and get maybe 40 or 50% of players in that team being then placed into high performance environment, because they're literally going to play with people who eventually pay for Scotland and Samoa and Uruguay. Scotland, Samoa and Uruguay in this year's Rugby World Cup, by the way. So we're talking about kids who will actually be coming to Nairobi who, depending on their form, could potentially be playing for their first national sides in September. Some of those kids will actually come to play for Samoa. 2 or 3 will actually play for Samoa in the World Cup. Some of them coming to play for Scotland in Nairobi will be playing in the World Cup. All right.
Where?
So this is actually going to be like high octane,
this is going to be a big test. Yeah.
Now, if you already have a crop of players at under 20 level who've been exposed onto that, if you already have the ethos and you can even get maybe 6 or 7 of them to get into the sevens program, it becomes an easier bit because now you're getting people with a different mindset. We could have done this maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It didn't happen, but we're here where we are right now.
Yeah.
Most of the current crop of players who were in the team have been in the team for close to a decade. I mean, people look at Oyo and forget that Oyo was a kid in 2016 when he was playing, and he scored that try against Fiji in the final. But fast forward, this is 8 years. It was like maybe 21 at that time. He's now in his 30s.
Yeah.
He has given his his best for the country, but is it the future for us? We need to ask ourselves some of those particular questions. I'm not saying that he's basically past his prime, but it's at this point in time you start saying, what do we actually have to start from the ground moving on up? The Junior World Rugby Trophy is in Nairobi next month.